I asked them question after question. Did they have cars when you were a kid? Did they have televisions when you were a kid? And I would say, thanks to my grandfather that he found very amusing, I would occasionally say, are you sure you weren't a slave when you were a kid? And he would say, no, slavery was over when I was born, thank you very much. So I would ask lots of questions, and I would listen, and even today, when I sit down to write, my grandparents, who are no longer with me in the flesh, are with me in the spirit. So it's like they're sitting with me when I sit down to write. Sometimes when I sit down to write, I even go so far as to get their photos out and sit them on the table with my computer where I'm writing. And I look at them and I say, okay, are you ready to go? And then we get started on the story. Because I owe so much to them, because I would ask them so many questions, and my grandmother was so patient. And I think about it now, how annoying I must have been. A little boy kind of pulling on her skirt, asking her the same questions over and over. Tell me about what it was like in 1910. Tell me what it was like in 1905, and she would tell me the story. She was very patient. And so one of the things I got from them was that all of our stories are valuable. Everywhere you see a person, you see at least one story. And where a story exists, there also exists an opportunity to share that story. And that's where writing comes from. We want to make a record of our stories, and everyone's story is worth sharing. So when you sit down to write, or you think about writing, start with listening, then observing. Because when you're creating characters, you want to be able to write about how they behave. Some people walk like this. Right? So you want to get that in the story. Some people walk like this. Right? Everybody walks different. So you want to be able to describe the way they walk, the way they talk. Some people talk like this, right? They have really deep voices. And sometimes what's really funny is you'll see a really big, strong man. Lots of muscles. And you think his voice is going to rumble like a peal of thunder. And he opens his mouth and says, hello. Right? So you want to be able to pay attention to the details and capture those details in the words that you use. Now, about Booker T. Washington. I've been fascinated with Booker T. Washington for a very long time because one of the things he was very interested in was reading and writing and learning, and he's most known today for creating Tuskegee University. He created a college where people still go and learn very valuable things. You can go there when you finish high school, you can go there for college, get a degree, learn how to operate in this world. The school still exists. He started it a long time ago. So I was very interested in that because while I was the quiet kid, I was the kid who could read really well. And my turning point took place in the first grade when the teacher was reading us a book about Abraham Lincoln. And she said, who wants to help me read this book? And I raised my hand. And she was shocked because I never said anything. And I think she kind of thought, he probably really wants permission to go to the bathroom or something. He probably doesn't really want to read this book. But I read a page, and she was so amazed, she said, you have to read another page. So I read another page. And she said, you have to read another page. And by the end of it, I started kind of like this, really shy. By the end of it, I was kind of reading it like this. I was walking. And then Abraham Lincoln said, blah, 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 blah. And she was amazed. And she was so amazed, she took me by the hand, and she took me to different classrooms, and she interrupted the lesson and said, you guys have to hear this kid read. And then I would read. So at the end of the day, she said, look, I'm not supposed to do this. I'm going to give you this book, and you can take this book home. So I took the book home with me. It was about young Abraham Lincoln. I'm guessing you've heard of Abraham Lincoln? Right? Okay. All right. 16th president. He's on the penny, right? Well, the thing that fascinated me most about Abraham Lincoln when I was a boy is that he didn't go to school. I had a really nice classroom, a lot of students, nice teacher. He had a piece of charcoal and a shovel. And he would sit in front of the fireplace and he would work on his letters and his numbers. And that's how he learned to read and write. I had my own blackboard at home because while I could read really well, I was probably the worst at penmanship and handwriting in my whole class. Really bad. You know, I would write something I think was a fascinating story, and you would look at it and it would just be squiggles, lines, and you couldn't even tell what the story was. So my dad built a blackboard in the basement of our house, and he got me a lot of chalk. My dad was a teacher. And he said, when you come home from school, you can work on your letters and your numbers. So I would think about Abraham Lincoln while I was working on those letters and those numbers. At the same time, around the same time, my father gave me a jigsaw puzzle, which was a picture of Booker T. Washington. And I was fascinated because he had old-fashioned clothes. He said he was born in 1856. So of course I ran to my grandfather with it and said, "Did you know him?" He said, "I know who he is, but no, I didn't know him." So I was fascinated by his story. And I learned that he didn't go to school either. He used to scratch out letters and numbers in the dirt because he wanted to learn. But the difference is, Abraham Lincoln couldn't go to school because he was poor. He was too poor to go to school. Okay? Booker T. Washington couldn't go to school because he was a slave. And he was African American, and it was against the law for him to learn to read or write. And when he was a slave, one of his jobs was to walk his mistress's daughter, a little girl, to walk her to school and carry her books every day. She would go into the classroom, and he would have to wait outside the window. And he would look through the window and watch them learning to read and write. He felt very badly about it. And he said he thought that to be in a classroom like that, to learn to read and write, would be like getting into paradise. He used to pray about it. That was his idea of paradise, to be able to read and write. Then when he was a little older, a young man came to his town. This is after slavery. Young man came to the town. He was a celebrity because he was an African-American young man and he could read. Everyone was excited. Everyone gathered in a public place. People bought scraps of paper, books, Bibles, all kinds of things. They'd say, "Here's a letter. Can you read this? Can you read this?" And he would read whatever was put in front of him. And Booker T. Washington got an idea. He said, "I want to be that man. I want to be the one with the information. I want to be the one with the knowledge. I want to be the one who reads." So he began to think about that. And I should tell you that although he was no longer a slave, he wasn't free to play. He couldn't run around. He couldn't play with his Game Boy. He couldn't play with his Xbox. He couldn't watch TV. He couldn't do anything like that. He had to go to work. So when he was 7 or 8 years old, he worked in a salt mine. Really hard work. That's what children had to do then. That's how the family was able to eat. Okay, so he saved up his pennies and kept them in a box. And his dream was the idea that he'd get enough money one day to find a school. One day he was working, he heard two men talking about a school called Hampton Institute. A school for black people, where you could go and read and write to your heart's content. And he knew he had to get there. So he saved up his money. His community gave him money. They gave him scraps of clothing. They shared what they had, their good wishes, their good thoughts, whatever. And he went on his way to find Hampton. He set out on foot. He walked. Did any of you walk to school? Or do you all get rides? You walk? Some people walk? Okay. How far do you walk? How far do you walk when you walk to school? Anybody? Yeah?
About half a mile.
About half a mile. Anybody else? The yellow back there. Yellow.
Across the street.
Across the street. I like that. I like that. When I was a kid, I walked down the street to school. I didn't have to go far. And as much as I liked school, there were some days when I didn't want to make that walk. And I'd make excuses. I'm tired. It's cold outside. I don't want to go. My mother would say, really, it's down the street. You can go to school. I mean, I could wave to my mother almost all the way into the schoolyard. That's how close I lived. But I still didn't want to make that walk sometime. Well, Booker T. Washington walked 500 miles. No sidewalks, no traffic lights, no crossing guards. Just dirt roads and mountains by himself. It took him a long time. It was cold. It was dark. They had things, they didn't have hotels then, but they had things called inns. You could rent a room at an inn. But guess what? You couldn't rent a room at an inn if you were black. So he'd knock on the door and say, "May I please rent a room?" And they would laugh in his face. Say, "You must be kidding." And he would say, "Can I sleep in the stable with the animals?" And they would say, "We have room for animals, but we don't have room for you." So he would sleep by the side of the road. He would sleep in a hollow log. He would do whatever he needed to do to make it to Hampton. So finally he's going there, he gets pretty close, he arrives at the last big city before Hampton. He's tired, he's hungry, he's thinking about giving up. Okay? But in the back of his mind, he hears all those people in the community that he left who gave him what they had. And they told him, you will not just be learning for yourself, you will be learning for all of us. All of us who never got the opportunity. Okay? So he thought about them, and he picked himself up, and he soldiered on. He got a job unloading ships at the dock. Made a little more money, enough to get to Hampton. He stood outside the gates of Hampton. He had 50 cents in his pocket. Okay? So he went in, he told the lady, I would like to enroll in this school. I would like to learn. She looked at him. He hadn't had a bath. He hadn't had a shower. He'd been on the road. He was dirty. He was filthy. She looked him up and down and said, I'm not sure we have a place for you in this school. He said, but I've come so far. I really want to learn. I really need to do this. And she said, well, I'll tell you what. We have a room over here and a hallway. They're dirty. If you clean that room and that hallway, I'll think about letting you in. So he went to work, he cleaned that room, he cleaned that hallway till it was spotless. He went back to the lady and she said, I guess you do really want to learn. Okay, we're going to let you in. Then she told him how much it would cost and he said, all I have is 50 cents. She said, that's not enough. But I tell you what, if you agree to clean these buildings, we'll let you learn in exchange. So that's how he got to go to Hampton. And when he got older, he founded his own college, Tuskegee University. So I wanted to tell the story of that walk he made as a boy. So that's what I set out to write. I wanted to put in particular details that would help you understand what he went through, what he felt, what he thought, what he was afraid of as he made this walk. After I complete the writing, that's called the manuscript, I send the manuscript in to the editor. The editor and I discuss an illustrator, an artist to work with. I told her I would really like to work with Bryan Collier, if he's available, if he's willing to work on this project. It turns out he was. So I'm very happy with the result. I hope you will be happy with the result. I will take time out to entertain questions after Mr. Collier talks about the art process, what happens when he gets the words, what he sets out to do to turn it into a story. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about the writing process, about the life of Booker T. Washington right now. Thank you for listening. You guys have been terrific. And now we'll have Bryan Collier.